Und wo sich eine festsetzen sollte, werden wir sie gemeinsam ausbrennen. Insgesamt aber können wir sagen, wir haben
Berlin is burning, the Third Reich is collapsing, and the ruins announce its end. Among the shadows of defeat, one of the most feared men of the Nazi era, Heinrich Himmler, leader of the SS, vanishes from the scene. While Hitler remains trapped inside the fear bunker, Himmler begins a mysterious escape, hidden under a false identity, moving through shattered roads and towns, barely surviving the chaos. But how did he manage to evade the Allies for days? What exact steps did he take to flee from the heart of the Nazi downfall? And perhaps most disturbing, why, in the final days of the Reich, did he betray Hitler himself, seeking an agreement with the enemy? The answers lie in a story filled with intrigue, tension, and the final power struggles of a war that was already lost. The truth, as always, is hidden in the details. Inside the besieged capital, while Hitler locked himself inside the fear bunker, Heinrich Himmler, supreme chief of the SS and one of the architects of the regime, understood that his power was crumbling along with the walls of the Reich. Still dressed in his immaculate uniform, but with eyes filled with unease, he met discreetly with a small circle of his most trusted collaborators. Among them was Werner Grothmann, his loyal aide, and a few SS officers whose mission would be to clear a path northward, away from the Soviet fire. The plan was risky: escape Berlin before the Soviet encirclement closed completely. Avoiding main routes was essential. The city was packed with barricades, patrols, and desperate refugees. On the chosen night, Himmler left behind offices and corridors heavy with the smell of damp paper and smoke, carrying only the essentials. Vehicles, camouflaged with mud and branches, slipped through side streets where destruction had turned into tunnels of rubble. The sound of explosions grew more distant with every kilometer, though the feeling of being watched never faded. They passed German checkpoints, presenting credentials that still carried authority, though each military salute felt colder, emptier. Himmler traveled in silence, gazing out the window at half-abandoned towns, columns of wounded soldiers, and women dragging suitcases. He knew that with each kilometer he was moving closer to the unknown, and further from a Führer he had already, deep inside, chosen to abandon. The improvised convoy pushed northwest, seeking zones still under German control but outside the immediate reach of the Eastern Front. The roads were littered with burnt-out vehicles, dead horses, and endless columns of civilians. At times, Himmler and his men were forced to halt for hours, waiting to advance while Wehrmacht patrols checked papers and hunted deserters. The head of the SS had left his shadowy Berlin office carrying a briefcase with personal documents, valuables, and medicines. At each checkpoint, he presented his official pass, still capable of opening doors, but soon to become a danger. He knew that within days, his name on a piece of paper could seal his fate. In the region of Mecklenburg, the group took to rural backroads to avoid large towns. The night was their ally. They slept in abandoned farms, and the silence was broken only by the distant hum of Allied bombers crossing the sky. As they advanced, Himmler began to devise his final plan: to disappear under a new identity. He discarded his black uniform and put on common soldier's clothing, adding false insignia to appear as a wounded non-commissioned officer in retreat. The change was radical. His glasses, always spotless, were now hidden, his rigid posture transformed into a more hunched stance. He even practiced a rougher, slower voice to deceive anyone who might question him. He was accompanied by Grothmann and two soldiers who acted as escorts and couriers, playing their part without asking too many questions. Each village they crossed brought rumors. The Russians are already in this city. The Americans have crossed that river. Himmler listened, analyzed, and adjusted the course. It was no longer about serving the Reich. It was about surviving in a country reduced to ruins and suspicion. On May 9, 1945, just one day after Germany's surrender, Himmler and his small group had reached areas ever closer to the Baltic coast. The landscape was a mixture of chaos and silence, with columns of disarmed soldiers walking in the opposite direction, liberated prisoners searching for food, and officers trying to blend into the crowds to escape reprisals. In his improvised disguise, Himmler wore the uniform of the Feldgendarmerie, field police, with insignia carefully chosen to avoid attracting too much suspicion, yet still capable of projecting some authority at minor checkpoints. At 10:30 in the morning, the group passed through the small town of Plön, where old military buildings were now used as improvised registration posts by British troops and German military police under Allied command. They decided to skirt the area, using secondary paths and forest trails. Progress was slow, as they had to stop frequently to avoid mixed patrols of British and Soviet troops. On May 11th, in the early afternoon, they reached the outskirts of Lübeck, where the British presence was overwhelming. Strict checkpoints, fortified outposts, and closed roads. By 4 p.m., Himmler ordered the group to remain at a half-ruined farm while deciding the best route to cross into less guarded areas. There, they burned several personal documents and SS credentials, a decision that Grothmann found bitter, but necessary. On the morning of May 21st, shortly after 7 a.m., the group attempted to cross a bridge over the Elbe River, north of Bremen. At a secondary British checkpoint, soldiers of the Second Army began inspecting those who passed. Tension grew. Himmler, keeping his false identity, introduced himself as Sergeant Heinrich Himmler. He was briefly questioned, and although his papers seemed in order, one of the British officers noticed his accent and peculiar way of speaking. Without raising immediate suspicion, they sent him and his group to a prisoner screening center on the outskirts of Bremervörde. There, at 7 p.m., the identification process became more thorough. Prisoners were forced to empty their pockets, remove boots and caps, and undergo a superficial medical examination. Himmler, trying not to draw attention, avoided prolonged eye contact with the officers. However, during a more detailed inspection, one of the British soldiers found a small metal case among his belongings, and at that moment, suspicions began to grow. On the night of May 21, 1945, around 10 p.m., Himmler and his companions were taken into custody to a school converted into a prisoner screening center in Westertimke, east of Bremen. The site was dimly lit to avoid attracting night aircraft and was guarded by British sentries at every access point. Prisoners were divided into groups according to their supposed military functions: combatants, administrators, medics, and logistical staff. After 11 p.m., a British intelligence officer began a routine interrogation. The false Sergeant Himmler calmly answered questions about his unit and place of origin, claiming to have served in a logistics division dispersed near Hamburg. His cultivated accent and clear diction began to draw attention, though not enough for an immediate accusation. On the morning of May 22, around 9 a.m., the British initiated a more detailed medical examination. During this process, the unit's doctor noticed that the prisoner carried a well-preserved pair of glasses and that his hands lacked the wear typical of an infantry soldier. Inspecting his mouth, he observed an upper partial denture, shaped and aligned in a way that matched archived descriptions of a high-ranking Nazi leader. By 10 a.m., the medical officer reported his findings to the camp command. Immediately, an intelligence officer compared the physical traits with Allied records. The shape of the head, the trimmed mustache, and the narrow chin strongly matched the most recent images of Heinrich Himmler. At noon, the order was given to separate the prisoner from the rest and transfer him to an interrogation center in Lüneburg. The convoy departed at 1 p.m. under armed escort, traveling along partially destroyed roads. During the journey, the prisoner maintained a rigid posture and near total silence, interrupted only by brief responses when asked about comfort or basic needs. On May 23, at 6:30 p.m., the group arrived at the British headquarters established in a fortified country house on the outskirts of Lüneburg. There, another medical examination was carried out, and all personal belongings were confiscated, including a small metal case hidden in his undergarments. This discovery, combined with the physical descriptions, greatly increased the certainty that the man was in fact the Reichsführer SS. On May 23, 1945, at 7 p.m., inside the British headquarters in Lüneburg, a captain of intelligence began the formal interrogation. The prisoner, still identifying himself as Sergeant Hitzinger, responded with short, steady phrases, avoiding precise details about his unit or direct superiors. However, his calculated behavior and the way he studied each question began to raise stronger suspicions. At around 8 p.m., a British officer who had previously seen Himmler in propaganda photographs before 1945 entered the room. After a few seconds of direct observation, he requested a more thorough inspection. He ordered the prisoner to remove his cap and, in an unusual gesture for a common soldier, the man did so with a slight inclination of his head, a movement consistent with the etiquette of German high command. At 8:15 p.m., a military doctor resumed the physical examination. While inspecting the oral cavity, he identified a dental prosthesis with characteristics exactly matching those described by SS dental assistant Käthe Husermann, who was already in Soviet custody. The description matched even the metallic pattern of the base and the position of a fixed bridge. At 8:40 p.m., a coded telegram was sent to the British headquarters in northwest Germany, reporting that the prisoner could be Himmler. His detention under maximum security was ordered. By 9 p.m., the prisoner was escorted to a closed room guarded by 2 armed soldiers, while they awaited the arrival of a senior intelligence officer for definitive identification. During this time, the man requested a glass of water and, according to the record, remained standing against the wall with his hands clasped in front of him, showing no visible nervousness. At 9:45 p.m., Major Norman Whittaker arrived. He approached within a meter of the prisoner, observed him closely, and ordered him to state his real name. After a prolonged silence and a faint evasive smile, Whittaker declared firmly that he had no doubt. The man was Heinrich Himmler, the former Reichsführer SS. On May 23, 1945, at 10 p.m., Himmler was transferred under heavy guard to a smaller interrogation room inside the British headquarters in Lüneburg. The room contained an unvarnished wooden table, a hanging lamp, and 3 chairs. Major Whittaker sat facing him, with an official interpreter to his left and a military doctor in the background. Prepared to continue the physical inspection, Whittaker again demanded that he confirm his identity, warning him that medical and dental evidence could prove it. Himmler remained silent for a few seconds, then said softly, "You already know who I am." The interpreter repeated the phrase in English, and Whittaker ordered it to be recorded in the written report. The doctor began a routine search to verify whether he carried any hidden object. While inspecting the oral cavity, he noticed Himmler repeatedly moving his tongue to one side. Suspecting that he might be concealing something, he ordered him to open his mouth fully. 10 minutes later, Himmler made a sudden movement with his jaw and tongue, as if swallowing. The doctor reacted immediately, thrusting his fingers into the mouth to try to remove what appeared to be a capsule. The prisoner emitted a guttural sound and began to convulse violently. 2 soldiers restrained him while the doctor attempted to induce vomiting. A strong odor of bitter almonds, characteristic of potassium cyanide, filled the room. Himmler was laid on the floor, and manual cardiac massage was initiated. The military doctor requested serum and emergency equipment, but the available means were limited. The British medical officer officially confirmed the absence of pulse and respiration, noting the time in his personal record. At 11 p.m., radio communication was sent to British headquarters that Heinrich Himmler, prisoner in custody at Lüneburg, was dead. On May 23, 1945, immediately after official confirmation of death, Himmler's body was covered with a gray military blanket and carried by 2 soldiers to an adjoining room designated as a temporary observation area. A military photographer from the intelligence corps entered to take images of the face, hands, and uniform. A total of 6 photographs were taken, all with direct portable lamplighting. A medical team proceeded to strip the body for a complete inspection. Standard Wehrmacht undergarments, a partially torn uniform, and black leather boots were documented. In the inner pocket of his tunic, a small notebook with notes in German was found, along with several crumpled papers with addresses and names. At midnight on May 24, an officer of the British Counterintelligence Service, MI-19, arrived to verify the identity through facial comparison with previous photographs and medical descriptions provided by German defectors. He confirmed the match with 100% certainty. The body was placed on a stretcher and taken to an improvised morgue inside the headquarters. The chief medical officer signed the death certificate, establishing the cause as ingestion of potassium cyanide. All objects found on the body were reviewed by intelligence personnel, sealed in an envelope labeled "Property of Heinrich Himmler, Classified Evidence." By dawn, the body was placed in a simple wooden coffin, without visible identification, and discreetly transported in a military vehicle to an unknown location to avoid pilgrimages or public identification. Before sunrise, the final written report from Lüneburg headquarters on the prisoner was completed, including capture, interrogation, death, and final destination of the body. On the morning of May 24, 1945, the military vehicle carrying Himmler's coffin left Lüneburg heading south, escorted by 2 jeeps. The official order stated that the destination was to remain secret even from some members of the convoy. By mid-morning, the convoy stopped briefly in a wooded area near the town of Winsen and Durluhe. A high-ranking British officer joined the group, carrying a sealed envelope with written instructions from headquarters. The coffin was removed from the truck and placed on the ground beside a small, pre-dug trench. There was no ceremony, only 6 people present: 3 soldiers, 2 officers, and a military doctor. The doctor once again confirmed the death and verified that the cyanide capsule had left visible traces on the gums and oral mucosa. He recorded the details in an additional report. The coffin was buried without marking the site with any visible sign. The exact location was registered on a military map classified as top secret and stored in British archives. By noon, the personnel left the site, erasing any surface traces of the excavation. The terrain was covered with leaves and branches to avoid detection. In the following days, from May 25 to May 30, 1945, different versions circulated within British intelligence itself. Some officers claimed the burial was temporary and that the body was later exhumed and cremated in another undisclosed location. Others maintained that it was never moved from its first grave. On June 5, 1945, an internal MI5 document reiterated that the final fate of Heinrich Himmler's body must remain unknown to the public, and must not be officially confirmed under any circumstances. On June 6, 1945, news of Himmler's death began to leak discreetly among the Allied High Command in Germany. At Montgomery's headquarters, British officers exchanged comments on the political convenience of announcing or withholding the fact publicly. The official order remained absolute silence, to prevent Himmler from becoming a martyr or symbolic figure for the remnants of Nazism. Among high-ranking German prisoners, reactions varied. Some, such as former Waffen-SS officers, received the news with disbelief, suspecting a covert assassination. Others interpreted it as proof that the Third Reich had completely collapsed, and that even its most powerful leaders had no escape. In the internment camps, former members of the Nazi Party exchanged rumors that Himmler had secretly negotiated with the Allies and was eliminated to silence him, that he had never died and was living under another identity. None of these versions could be confirmed, and the lack of official information only fueled speculation. In London and Washington, controlling the narrative was a priority. Himmler's death was treated as a closed and classified matter, with minimal press coverage and no public photographs. The enemy was already defeated, and the Allies preferred that the figure of the Reichsführer vanish without leaving a trace. The escape and final days of Heinrich Himmler serve as a reminder that even the most feared figures of the Third Reich could not escape the regime's total collapse. His attempt to flee, his capture, and his mysterious death remain one of the darkest and most enigmatic chapters of the end of World War II. Surrounded by secrets that, to this day, remain buried in classified archives and fragmented historical memory. And perhaps the most striking of all, from being the man most loyal to the Führer, and one of the most feared in Europe, he died as one of the greatest traitors the Third Reich had ever known.